All right, let's look at the assault now and really take a look at what happens as this Battle of Yorktown moves forth. So the two key battles on the night of the 14th of the attack on Redoubts, there's two fortified positions out in front of the wall that are absolutely key to the defense, because without those, they're right up at the wall. So Rochambeau and his forces are going to attack Redoubt 9. And here are the French soldiers lined up ready for the assault. Now they're moving forward to their assault. And again, these are generated, pictures generated, but they're accurate to the degree. And they follow orders, and their orders are to go forward and then pause and wait for the engineer forces, the sappers, to move forward, for them to come forward and destroy the fortifications here, these tree limbs that are designed to stop the troops before they can assault the walls of the redoubt. And so they follow their orders and they stop. And in today's war, we would call that the ultimate killing zone. And they sit there and they wait for the engineers to come forward. And then finally the engineers come forward and they're able to assail the walls of the fort. Another thing that happens here is one of the sad chapters is that some of the uniforms of the British and some of the uniforms of the French are very, very similar. So you have a substantial number of friendly fire incidences here where French kill French and suffer from it. Now the American situation is a little different, and we'll see here. So here, Alexander Hamilton actually pulls rank and says he wants to lead the troops, the American troops that are sitting against Redoubt 10. And they're going to go forward, and you can see there's a difference between the uniforms of the American soldiers and the French troops. And we'll talk to that again later. Now, that's a crazy video, again, generated by Gemini. And I don't particularly like their videos, but it shows the point. The difference is that the American troops do not go forward and pause and wait for sappers to come forward, engineers to come forward, and to redo the arbutus, wooden fortifications blocking them. They just knock them down. They do whatever they need to do to get past the fortifications and to move on into the fort. And they drive forward and they drive into the fort and they redoubt their redoubt very, very rapidly. Now, so what? What's the consequences of that? This is the consequence of that. Look at these numbers. Look at what we have here. They're really quite incredible. French losses 120. American losses 34. That's really quite extraordinary. And here you see part of the reason for it in the difference, which is where they fight. But why is this? We're going to go on, and later on we'll tell you the casualty figures for the French and Americans, and indeed in this battle the French are going to lose many more troops than the Americans. But why do the Americans do so well when the British don't? And this is a really kind of favorite topic for me. And again, it's the difference in the style. But why do we have that difference in style? I'll take you back to the Mayflower Compact. This is 1620. And when the Mayflower lands, there are a number of different people on it. The religious separatists, we call them the Pilgrims, they were characterized as a group called the Saints. The laborers, the servants, some gentry, some middle class were also there, not members of the saint, not the members of the religious. And these were called the strangers. And they were struggling as to how are we going to get along? what will we do to keep from coming to struggle? Now, very recently, like last week, I discovered that one of my relatives was on that boat, my 14th grandfather, and he was one of these strangers, very instrumental. We won't go into that now, but it's fascinating for me to have discovered that. Uh, so the Mayflower Compact is written because there's a diversity on the boat, and they have to cope with that diversity. They have to manage that diversity. And the assumption is, the demand by the strangers is that all be treated equally, and that there is no government imposed upon them from above, that the people will govern themselves and they can't be governed without their own consent. So the basic principles that govern American life are born here. Diversity is essential to who America is and what it is. Here are the 13 colonies, and as you already know, it's divided into all kinds of different immigrant groups. So these are different settlements from different countries across Europe. They're different languages, different cultures, different backgrounds. Even more importantly, here in many ways are here all the different religions. All the way across the 13 colonies, we have all different kinds of religions. And the diversity makes us find a way to get along together. Now, the other element that drives us and explains us is the frontier experience. And the frontier, I love Turner's, Frederick Jackson Turner's thesis, which he writes in 1893. It comes out of the 1890 census. He's lamenting the fact that the linear frontier has ended. But realize the frontier experience exists for every immigrant who comes to America, because the immigrant that arrives in America, it is absolutely essential for that immigrant to show these attributes: self-reliance, individualism. They don't trust centralized authority. They like decentralized authority. They're going to be scattered in many cases. So there isn't authority available to them, and religious authority that they're going to accept. They're also going to be skilled with weaponry because of the nature of the collision they have with the environment, whether it's wild animals or whether it's struggles with the Native Americans that were here before us. But the characteristic of the frontier is going to be incredible endurance and incredible resourcefulness. This meant when those American troops contacted that fort, they're going to be resourceful, and they're going to be self-reliant in taking care of it and coping with it in a different kind of way. The French forces, the discipline of the French force, the hierarchical command, the linear scale is just totally, totally different. So the frontier experience is going to define who we are. Now, there are several other attributes about this that people don't seem to have much of an understanding of. America is uniquely literate. Colonial America is uniquely literate. Those pilgrims on the Mayflower coming across were separatists. They'd separated from the Church of England, and they rejected the idea of the hierarchy of the Church of England. And part of that is they wanted people to read the Bible and to come to conclusions and dialogue of their own relative to the Bible. Now, if you're depending upon reading the Bible, then obviously you have to be taught to read. So there's a substantial emphasis on the American colonies in teaching people to read. In the colonial period, not at the time of Mayflower, but in the later period, there's tremendous existence of pamphlets, newspapers, booklets You've all certainly heard of Tom Paine's Common Sense. And these are booklets that people read, newspapers. People kept diaries. People kept family Bibles where a family history was recorded in the family Bible. Uh, this is a statement as to get over there, the literacy rate. Look at these numbers. In America, the literacy rate 70 to 90%. The British Army was an army of professional soldiers. The officers were of the aristocracy. They would be literate, but the common soldier, not so much. So a very, very different type of pattern than what we've seen before. And if you look at the French soldier is from a Catholic background, not a Protestant like the British, and the literacy rate there is even less. So one of the reasons why we said that American soldier was educable is because the American soldier is unusually literate. Now, does that make America unusual? Yes, it does. If you look at the literacy in the 13 colonies, it's substantially higher than the literacy in Canada, colonial period Canada. Again, it's a Catholic basis, and the Catholic Church relies upon catechism, teaching the catechism, and people obeying the instructions and the tenets that they're told. If you look at colonial Spain, Mexico, Latin America, the hierarchy is even more stringent. There's still remnants of the Inquisition hanging around, and the catechism was very, very strongly empowered, and you were discouraged from making independent judgments and taking interpretation. So you had no need to read, and you weren't taught to read. America has a much stronger push to develop schools and education and literacy. And what about diversity? Were the other colonial nations as diverse as the 13 colonies? Absolutely not. If you look at the 13 colonies, we've already talked about the tremendous diversity of religion, the tremendous diversity of nationalities comes with this, the culture, the language, so much carries with it. In colonial America, again, it's basically settled by the French, and it's overwhelmingly Roman Catholic, and the Jesuits and Catholic orders had an enormous impact on it, and it was homogeneous. It was not a heterogeneous it was not a pluralistic society to anything like the example in the United States and America. And if you go to Spanish, Mexico, Spanish, Latin America, again, you have a very, very different situation where you have a tremendously tiered society that was tiered early on, and certainly no concept of equality, no concept of participation to the same degree that we see in the 13 colonies. So when those soldiers go forward and hit that redoubt, they're carrying a lot of baggage with them. It shows why they are better in going after that than not. So let's look at some timelines here of how this ends up. So in Napoleon's assault, he captures Little Gibraltar, that peninsula that we mentioned before that juts out into the bay, into the harbor. Overnight, he basically places those positions, those artillery positions out there with the sandbags around it. And in night, he opens up with the bombardment on the fleet down before with the hot shells that you see. Very, very quickly, they realize that it is not sustainable and they cannot stay with it. And so the French fleet withdraws and the Spanish fleet evacuates. So the attack is December 16th. The withdrawal is December 19th. Again, remember the characteristics I gave you before of Napoleon. He is one who favors speed tremendously going forward. And the sad thing about this, and Napoleon apparently has nothing to do with this. This is after he departs the scene, I believe. When the the British and Spanish fleet withdraws, the monarchists that were in the city of Toulon very much want to flee with them because they know what's going to happen to them when the revolution takes over and the reign of terror comes back to Toulon. So they try to get on the ships and sail out, but obviously there's a limit to how much those ships can take out. So very, very quickly, the revolutionary forces come in and recapture Toulon, and reign of terror goes out, and there's tremendous execution, about 800, 2,000, nobody knows how many, but mass executions. And they treat Toulon almost like Carthage was treated, where they want to change the name and destroy it. Now, this is a contrast between what's happening in the American Revolution and so many of the other social revolutions in the Age of Revolution, is there is not the same degree of purge. Some Tories are mistreated. The Tories flee and go to Canada, go back to England, but there's no mass execution. There's no, I am certainly aware of. Now let's take a look at some final numbers here that are kind of interesting. Here's a correlation of forces here, and I was surprised by how little we're aware of this. So American ground forces at Yorktown, about 8,800. French ground forces, about 7,800. But on de Grasse's fleet, 19,000. So American forces make up 24% of the forces engaged here. Now, British ground forces are 5,500. Hessian forces, German forces, 2,500. So an enormous proportion of the ground British forces are Hessian, and the British naval about 13,000. So many people are not aware of this enormous amount of support from the French. We've already talked about the financial support. Here's the manpower support. Here's another figure. Here is the casualty figures. So here, total casualties. American make up about 66% of the total casualties. The French forces took 34%, French 66%. And here, of course, the British, their casualty figures are total because they lose their entire force as POWs. But look at this in a different kind of tally. If you look at the land operations, Americans suffer 135 casualties to the French 380 casualties. And again, the breakdown, almost 3 times as many Frenchmen killed as Americans killed, or twice as many, I should say. And if you look at the full measure, including the naval ships and the naval forces and the casualties there, there are about 200 plus of dead and wounded on de Grasse's fleet in the Battle of the Chesapeake. So if you look at this, the French casualties are 580 and the Americans are 135. So the French support was of not only of silver, and not only of manpower on the field, but also of blood left on the field. An incredible tale of what was happening. Now let's take a look at the consequences of the war and other ways in which we can measure it. This is one of again, this is an illustration I ordered from, and I really like it and what it does, what it enables me to do. Here, at the end of the battle, the British forces are forced to march in a gauntlet between the American forces on one side and the French forces on the other side. And look at the uniformity of the French forces, the uniformity of the British forces, and the diversity of the American forces. By the way, the black soldiers indicated here is accurate. A black unit, I believe it was a black regiment, is formed in Rhode Island and comes down and marches down to Yorktown and is engaging in the Battle of Yorktown. And some would say that that was the last integrated unit until Harry Truman integrates the military in, I believe, 1948. So for a long time. And so I think the contrast between these two is really telling and an important tale. Now, the other thing that's important in this tale that I think I've cut from this, I don't think I put it in here, is Cornwallis is too ashamed to come forward and surrender. So he sends his second in command, who is a General O'Hara, I believe. And O'Hara comes forward and offers his sword to Rochambeau. And Rochambeau turns and says, no, you don't surrender to me. You surrender to Washington. He's in charge here. And Washington turns and says, no, you don't surrender to me because you're not the commanding officer. You will surrender to my second in command. I think it was a general named Clinton. And so O'Hara surrenders to Clinton and gives his sword to Clinton. About 12 years later, O'Hara is fighting in a siege where he loses to the French forces. And it's at the Battle of Toulon, and he surrenders to Napoleon. So O'Hara has the luck of surrendering in two of the most important battles of history, you could say, of history. But the consequences here are truly profound, and I just hit the wrong button. Let me see if I can get us back on track here. So Yorktown was transformation in so many different ways in what happened in America. So de facto independence, the war is going to go on for a period of time. It shattered the political will of the British. It showed the coalition way of war, and this becomes a characteristic of America's way of war that Whitley talks to repeatedly and has been a total constancy for America through almost every war it's ever engaged in. And the concept of the citizen soldier and the professional military and the creation of important institutions and the concept of going forward with self-government. These are very important. Now, it's kind of interesting in what happens in England. So the government fails, the government of Lord North fails, and the Whigs take over power, which is different. They've lost a world war, but what's crazy is they shifted to what they characterize as a second British Empire. They pour their resources into India, into Australia, into Canada, and they do very, very well with it. The assumption was that America would end its trade with Britain, but indeed, English trade with America, the coming United States, grows tremendously, is important, and the Industrial Revolution will burgeon, will erupt right shortly after this and bring tremendous wealth to England, and it produces constitutional and imperial reforms that are very, very important. So the economic consequences for Britain are not what you would have anticipated. Well, the national debt was high. The growth of the economy subsequent deferred from that. As I said already, the trade with the United States actually grew. The rise, the end of mercantilism, and the rise of a new type of trade benefited them tremendously, and the Industrial Revolution the economic benefit. And here you can see from 1775 to 1790, actually an increase in trade. So the economic benefits were not there. Now, the sad thing, of course, is what happens in France. So the financial cost, the enormous amount of money that uh, France advanced, and by the way, most of that were loans. In many cases, Hamilton paid them back eventually, but he paid them back to a revolutionary government, not the monarchy. Uh, their prestige did increase, but at a very, very short timeline. Um, the trade monopoly that they thought would exist between the US and France doesn't happen. And as I said before, the forces that return come with concepts of freedom and independence and the rule of the right of the governed to consent to their government was important. And so the war ended up obviously accelerating the French Revolution. So the winner ultimately lost. That was the Pyrrhic victory. This is the story of O'Hara surrendering at Yorktown and surrendering at Toulon. So I forgot I had this there. And again, as we've said before, Napoleon absolutely blossoms from this. And here again are the main characteristics we talked about: identifying the decisive point, the combined arms. He'll develop the core operation, using speed as a force multiplier, artillery as the central power, and the scavenger logistics where he goes out and finds his logistics on the countryside. One of the benefits of the combined arms and the core is those smaller groups go out and are able to scavenge resources and the unity of command with him in total command. And you can go on and talk about the development of Napoleon's charisma, but I'm not going to. So I'm going to end it there then. And this is a preview of where we're going next. So our next talk is going to be a comparison between the American Civil War and the Russian Civil War. And I'm going to bring one of my colleagues from Russia, from St. Petersburg, to join us on this. So I think you'll find it very, very interesting. All right. Hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.